Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Kyle. This is Sadhaka, which is a live show presented by embodiedphilosophy.com, in which I interview practitioners of all stripes from within the yoga and wider wisdom community and beyond. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Forakis. I'm pronouncing that right, yes? Forakis, who actually is the first person to represent a tradition outside of the yoga and Eastern wisdom traditions. She's from the theater and performance background, and so I'm really excited to talk to her about the creative life practice which she developed, and stay tuned for the end, because at the end she's actually going to offer us a couple of practices that we can then incorporate into our own lives. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Gia. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So the first thing I really wanted to talk about, along this theme of just a general life practice, especially because you are the first person to be interviewed that represents a tradition outside yoga practice. So it sort of implies that there's something about just this idea of practice that's more general and more universal. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you think, from a philosophical perspective or just practical perspective, why having a life practice is so important.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So I've been thinking about that, and I've been noticing, actually, I don't know if you've noticed this, that the word practice has entered a common vernacular lately.
Totally, yeah.
So I think I'd like to begin to answer that question by saying that I'd like to identify three key elements of practice that I think are useful for starting this conversation, and how they impact what I call OTOA, or one thought, one action, creative life practice. Those three key elements I think of as discipline, ritual, and process. Process refers to that part of the word of practice that is ongoing, that's evolving, that does not reach a finite place. It's a practice. Within practice, there are no mistakes, as long as we're learning. So it's an evolving learning, a kind of cumulative learning. There's also something gentle about practice, as opposed to discipline, which has some less than positive associations and connotations. However, I'm thinking of the word in terms of, not in terms of rigidity or punishment, but more in terms of development, commitment, skill set, learning, a body of learning, a discipline. And then within the terminology of ritual and how that applies to practice, ritual, Twyla Tharp, I don't know if you know who she is. She's a choreographer, dancer choreographer.
Yes, I've heard of her.
And she wrote a book about her creative practice. And in it, the first chapter is about ritual. Now, I read this only a couple of weeks ago, actually, so it helps to articulate things that I've been thinking about for a number of years anyway. But so her definition of ritual, I think, is lovely in that she says, when we incorporate ritual into our life or our creative practice, it eliminates the questions of why are we doing this, or even whether we like doing this or not. It's become habitual. It grows into a way of being or a way of living. So those three key terms, discipline, ritual, and process, I think inform the way I approach creative life practice. Now, anyone can have a creative life practice. Is something that I think is very important to share in terms of how I embody this idea. I make what I am doing, what I am teaching, a little bit different in that I call it OTOA creative life practice. Now, OTOA is the acronym, stands for the acronym of One Thought, One Action, OTOA, which we pronounce OTOA. So OTOA creative life practice refers to a way of teaching and a set of teachings and exercises for developing your own creative life practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, before we get into a little more deeply into what creative life practice is, I really like what you said about kind of the three components of practice, and your comment at the beginning about how practice has really become a part of our vernacular, and then the points that you make about the things that constitute it, I think it really speaks to, maybe it's the development of that or the emergence of that as kind of a response to a lack of the kind of socially, the traditional ways in which we had discipline and ritual in our lives, which tended to be like religious institutions or a variety of other institutions that seem to have socially kind of disintegrated in a certain kind of way. So these other practices like yoga practice, like creative life practices seem to be emerging as a way to offer what is really the beauty of ritual and discipline, because people hear those words and in ritual it's like, oh, that sounds like something my grandma did when she would go to church. It's not modern, right? And the same with discipline, like you rightly pointed out. Discipline has this kind of like rigid connotation, but no, the disciplining of life. We learn this in yoga that by having a discipline, we actually become more free, rather than what often seems to be associated with that word, which is that it's discipline means you're not free, you're somehow contained in a certain kind of way. When maybe we could say that this loss of discipline and ritual has actually caused a kind of a certain kind of psychological malaise in people and an inability to really act and move forward in their lives in creative ways and professional ways. So that was just something that came up to me.
Well, can I respond to
Yeah,
that? Because I
please
think
do.
you're onto something, and it reminds me of something that I want to also add. But that I totally agree that, especially now that with the advent of technology and our smartphones and how we have so much more information available to us all the time, and there is kind of a overwhelming that happens, and how do you select from all the information coming at you? Discipline, in the way that you and I are talking about it, gives us a framework to put context around information and be selective and discerning about what we want to focus on. Because there's so many things, and if you give them all equal value, well, you're exhausted. It's impossible. And what you said about ritual and the connotations that has a kind of religiosity to it, that can be off-putting. However, I do want to add that one of the components of ritual that I think is very useful to acknowledge in creative life practice or practice in general, is that ritual suggests that we are connecting with an activity that takes us to outside of ourselves, or connects us. We stay with ourselves, but we connect to something greater than ourselves. So that the purpose, whereas daily activities, routine activities, don't necessarily, they have immediate gratification. I go to the supermarket, I shop for food, now that I have food. I wake up in the morning, I make breakfast, now I'm fed. There's immediate gratification, there's immediate payoff.
And like a lack of consciousness. It's just like, it's empty habit.
Yes.
But necessary habit.
Necessary, right. Whereas ritual may not have immediate gratification or immediate results. But in the doing of it, And in the practice of it, and in the discipline, which is the repetition of it, the benefits are cumulative.
Right, right.
And they may be for more than just you alone.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. Okay, so let's dive into a little more about OTOA creative life practice. I would love to hear a little bit of the story of how what in your background led you to want to develop this, and then maybe if you want to kind of segue that into just kind of a little more explication of what it's all about.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I think it's necessary to begin with the development of OTOA, one thought, one action, and explain that I began discovering it or developing it while I was still in graduate school at Yale School of Drama, where I'd gone to study directing for the stage. And in my studies, I was looking for a method or a way to communicate with the actors that I was working with to bring my aesthetic to the stage, which was I needed to have a more visually, physically dynamic and wider range of physical expression, physical engagement, and detail. That's what I was looking for from the performers, to create a more visual storytelling. And slowly this thing began to emerge, which I came to call One Thought, One Action. In the most simplistic of terms, I describe One Thought, One Action as a method for identifying increments of thought as smaller components of physical action. Smaller increments of thought as smaller components of physical action, which really describes for me something we call moment-to-moment experience. So as that developed and it began to permeate all the work I was doing on the stage while at school and then beyond into my professional career, I started to teach this technique as a performance technique and training, which we now call the OTOA PTT, Performance Technique and Training. And as I was teaching, it became very clear that if I was going to talk the talk, I had to walk the walk. And that was not just as a teacher or as a director. I had to live it out of the classroom, out of the rehearsal room. And One Thought, One Action began to inform everything I was doing, my administrative work, my daily, organizing my life, the way I was talking and receiving and listening to people, as a practice. Now, practice does not suggest that I am perfect, but it does suggest that I have something that I'm reaching for, that I'm working towards, that I'm in a process, that I'm evolving, I'm learning from my mistakes, I'm learning from doing it, to the best of my ability. So, as my OTOA practice began to permeate my daily life, I recognized that this is a creative life practice. And that kind of just dawned on me about 2.5 years ago, that's what I was doing. I was living a creative life practice, applying OTOA principles to my daily life. So about 2 years ago, I started developing a curriculum for sharing this daily practice. And what I love about it is that, like I said, you don't have to be an artist to have a creative life practice. You don't have to, you don't have to be in the theater. It's for everyone in every discipline. And in some way, it's kind of reaching that same audience that came to see my work in the theater, or that still eventually sometimes comes to see my work in the theater, but it's reaching them kind of more directly. So the thing that they were receiving from having a OTOA motivated performance, this engagement, this more vivid physical dynamic between performer and audience member, is something that they can bring into their own life and bring a more vividness to their daily life. I like to describe the experience of living a creative life practice kind of like, do you know this television commercial from a couple of years ago? It was for a allergy medication called Claritin, and people would be going around their lives and everything seemed okay, but they had allergies.
Yeah.
And then they take a Claritin and this film gets removed from their life. Suddenly everything is Technicolor. They didn't realize what they were missing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it is.
Wow.
It's being engaged in the moment more fully, more frequently.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
we're not perfect, but you know when you've left it that there is a way back if you have some tools.
Okay. So is it something that you're doing like throughout your day, or is it, you know, like a meditation practice? There's a certain time of day where I'm doing certain components of this creative life practice. Like what is like the meat of the practice itself?
Yeah. It's a little of both.
Okay.
So I happen to have my own personal yoga and meditation practice that I have been doing since 1987.
Right.
Evolving through all these years. You could say that stands outside of it, or you could say that informs it.
Right.
It's part of my discipline.
Yeah.
It's part of my ritual. It's part of my daily practice. However, the exercises that I'm developing for CLP are to help you develop your sensory awareness and what I call the creative influences so that you can live it after you stop meditating, after you stop doing your yoga.
Yeah.
So it's living that connectedness that you find in meditation and in yoga all day long. Now that's the hope. But just like meditation, if any of you out there meditate, you know that you slip in and out of it.
Yeah. Maybe at the bar you're not living your creative life practice in the same way. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it's interesting that all of these things that you're saying. It's so complementary to yoga practice, and we've been talking about yoga, and especially the one thing that occurred to me when you were talking about the increment of thought related to the increments of your physical, and that parallelism, that integration of mind and body, that kind of rejection of the mind-body dualism, that has plagued our culture, is really so beautifully complementary to yoga practice. So really it's, having more tools to kind of live your yoga off the mat is really seems to be what you're doing. So I'm wondering if are there other things that you think how you see like yoga and this practice related, or anything you want to like contribute on that question?
Well, yes, there is a relationship, and I think that's why we were introduced. And I think you said it well when you said it's how to live your yoga practice off the mat.
Yeah.
I think there is a common perception, contemporary conception, that yoga is something you do in the yoga studio or do it, on the mat, as you say, and then you leave it behind and you get about your life.
Yeah.
And some people do it that way.
Right.
No judgment.
Yeah.
But the more you do it, you realize yoga can be a way of life.
Yeah, right.
So the creative life practice is perhaps it's being connected, but without the poses.
Yeah. I like that. Being connected but without the poses. Perfect.
I actually refer to the connection as the core principle of creative life practice. That our core longs for connection, and creative connection is kind of the source of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
That, mystical thing that
Is creativity.
It's creativity, but is our life force.
Yes.
Creative life force, if you will.
Yes. And many people would say that the prana shakti, which is the prana is the life force energy, is inherently creative. That there is a certain way in which connecting to that creative life force is almost a spiritual experience. You're connecting to the source of creativity, and that itself is something divine. So
right, and that leads us back to that item of being connected to something larger than yourself, and that's what ritual provides us with, and that's what practice is a part of ritual, or vice versa.
Amazing. Cool. So we're gonna do a little practice now. Gia is gonna lead us through a practice, and so even though this is a video, we're gonna encourage you to, a lot of it she's gonna ask you to close your eyes. I'm gonna be participating in the exercise, so if you're watching the video, you're just gonna see me doing a bunch of funny things, and it probably won't be that much help to you. So try to follow along, close your eyes, and actually do the practice with us. And I'm gonna set myself up here, and then Gia, whenever you're ready, and if you want to share anything before we start, or
so I'm going to talk us through 6 exercises in a sequence that are designed to strengthen our skills in watching and listening. My position on watching and listening is that it's a gateway to enriching just about everything. And we'll talk more about that at the end of this sequence.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes, and then I'm going to just talk you through this. All you have to do is listen. 4 of these exercises are going to be with your eyes closed, and then 4 of them are going to be with your eyes open. Okay?
Okay.
So, I'm going to close your eyes, and I'm just going to talk you through some breathing exercises. When I ask you to begin, please inhale for 4 counts through your nose, and then exhale for 7 counts. Inhale for 4 counts. Exhale for 7 counts. Inhale for 4 counts. And exhale for 7 counts. Now I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes closed. And for the next 30 seconds, I'd like you to just listen to your environment. Listen to the sounds around you. That's all you have to do for 30 seconds, is just listen. I'd like you to keep your eyes closed. Make a mental note of what you noticed while you were listening. And now I'd like you to adjust your focus as you're listening. I'd like you to just shift your weight every time you hear a new sound or make a physical gesture. So every new sound, just shift your weight or make a physical gesture for 30 seconds. keep your eyes closed while I describe the next exercise. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. No, that's wrong. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to change your focus for listening and listen now, instead of to the environment around you, listen to your thoughts. So for the next 30 seconds, I'd like you to just listen to your thoughts. Now, keeping your eyes closed, same adjustment as before. With each new thought, I'd like you to shift your weight or make a physical gesture. With each new thought, I'd like you to shift your weight or make a physical gesture, keeping your eyes closed. 30 seconds. Very nice. Now, keeping your eyes closed, in a moment I am going to ask you to open your eyes, but for just a second, take a moment to make any mental notes about the sequence of exercises that you've just done, and any observations you've made about the differences between listening to the environment around you and listening to the thoughts in your mind. Try not to be judgmental, just make some mental notes about the observation of the differences. All right, so now, in a moment I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, and what you're going to do when you open your eyes is you're going to focus on watching or seeing. So you're going to look around your environment for 30 seconds. That's all you have to do when I ask you to open your eyes. So you can open your eyes now. 30 seconds of just seeing your environment. And now the same adjustment. Every time you see something new, shift your weight or make a physical gesture. See your environment. And every time you see something new, shift your weight or make a physical gesture. Wonderful. Now, as you're seeing your environment, find one thing that you are not attracted to. Something in your environment that is not aesthetically pleasing to you. And I want you to look at it for 30 seconds. One thing that is not especially attractive. Now here's an adjustment. While you're still looking at that one thing, I'd like you to find something that is aesthetically pleasing in that object. One thing inside the object that is not aesthetically pleasing, that is aesthetically pleasing. Now I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just take a moment to make a mental note about this sequence of exercises and what you observed. Remember, we began with just listening to the environment around you, then listening and shifting your weight with every new sound, then listening to the thoughts in your mind, and then shifting your weight with each new thought. Then I asked you to open your eyes and just see the environment around you. And then shift your weight with each new thing that you saw. And then I asked you to find one thing that was not aesthetically pleasing or attractive to you. And then to find the one thing within that that was aesthetically pleasing. Okay. So, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And if you'd like, for those of you watching the video, you might want to make some notes about this experience. And what I would like to say is that this is one of the sequence of exercises that I share in our Creative Life Practice introductory seminars. And then we do different variations of it in the intensives or the classes.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so great. It's actually, it's like such a nice meditation almost, and I might even steal it and put it in my own class. But it was so great. You know, it's interesting. A few things occurred to me. First, just how, you know, it was definitely easier in this like very loud Harlem neighborhood that I live in to like move with the new sounds. So many sounds. I mean, I just realized just how many, and so far off, like the layers of sound was so, but kind of beautiful to kind of integrate yourself with it in that way. I found it harder to note the change of thoughts. So it's more like, well, something's happening, so I'm moving. You know, so it's hard. I found it harder to connect, to ground myself in like the changing thoughts than I found it to ground in the sounds that I heard. But also, I love the movement within because, and perceiving in the same way, because it's something that we talk about a lot in yoga classes. That when you're observing your thoughts, it's the same thing as if you were observing the clouds outside. You're trying to cultivate a relationship with your thoughts, which is just as kind of, I don't want to say detached because that seems disembodied, but is just as open to that sort of relationship, so that we can, and as a result of that renewed relationship, that relationship of witnessing our thoughts, we can start to then develop new relationships with them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and then that was the same, and then that it was sort of a physical manifestation of that when I was looking at it. Was first of all I was like, oh, my apartment's so pretty, there's nothing unattractive in it, and then I saw the blue tape over there, which is attached to this electric cord, and I'm like, okay, that's really ugly. And then but then when you were something about the way you framed it as well when you said. The finding the aesthetically pleasing thing in the aesthetically unpleasing thing, as if it was like you were saying, like within that quote unquote unattractive object we can see if we look deeper kind of into the kind of layers of it. And when you said it that way, it's sort of like the whole object shifted in my perception. It really like it changed, almost like I was on mushrooms.
Like the Claritin commercial?
The Claritin commercial, exactly.
To film.
Exactly.
Thank
yeah.
you.
So there is
so
and just I think that looking as well, we live in such tunnel vision all the time. Just looking at your environment is something it's almost a radical act now to do. Yeah. To like actually look around you, It's rather than like at the floor ahead obsessing about, getting from point A to point B and all the million things you have on your to-do list.
Well, yeah, you bring up some very interesting observations because, I try to practice the observation, looking when I walk to the subway every day. Because I think I know this route that I take to the subway every day, but I make a very concerted effort to really see my way and what is new today.
Yeah.
Today they cut down a bunch of bushes in this public park area. That was new. But there's a lamppost that I never noticed before.
Yeah.
Or, they changed the garbage bin. It's not that these things are aesthetically necessarily beautiful or pleasing, but am I really awake? Or am I in my head?
Yeah.
When you looked around your room, did you think, oh, I know this room. I live here. Or did you see something that you hadn't noticed for a while? Or,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's really great. This has been really great interview, and lots of interesting stuff. I think people are going to really enjoy this episode. So to close, Gia, I would love to just hear and have you share how people can get in touch with you, how people can look up your trainings and explore creative life practice with you.
Thank you. I'd like to. I'd like to mention that I actually, can I do a little plug?
Oh, please, yes.
Because I happen to have a 2-day CLP intensive, not this weekend, but the following weekend. That is the 29th and the 30th of October. And you can go to the website, which is www.onethoughtoneaction.com.
Onethoughtoneaction.com. Okay.
So, spell that out, one word. Or you can reach me directly at Gia Forakis and Co. @gmail.com.
Is that ANDCO at Gmail?
ANDCO at Gmail.
Okay, Gia Forakis and Co. at gmail.com.
Should I spell my name? It's GIAFORAKIS and Co. at gmail.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Thank
Gia.
you,
It's been
Kyle.
such a pleasure. So, and then just lastly, as I always do, I'll put up this little blurb here. If you have yet to sign up for our, I actually took away the Embodied Philosophy logo. That's not what I meant to do. If you haven't yet signed up for our community and you want to hear more about these offerings when they're live, more of these videos, Sadhaka videos, as well as the Chit Heads podcast that we publish almost weekly, just text the word embody, EMBODY, to the number 44222. And then we have a whole masterclass collection of video classes on the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the teachings of Buddhism. And those of you who are watching today get a special 15% discount with the code Sadhaka15 that you can see at the bottom here. So if you want to do that, go check out that website, our website, 5tatvas.com/masterclass. So thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, friends. Thanks again, Gia.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right, bye-bye.
I called you Kyle instead of Jacob.
That's okay.